crash because nothing has happened out here.
I went to the sheriff's office and found that he had a man on the phone who wanted to tell me about a crash on his ranch.
But I don't know why, they don't tell what it was.
I think something really important happened, and I think it's been covered up.
I don't know what it is that's on that slab, but I certainly do not think that it's a human of any kind.
The Roswell Army Airfield was no ordinary airfield. Not some little place out in the wilds of New Mexico. In fact, it housed the 509th Bomb Group, which in 1947 was the only atomic bomb group in the world. The 509th were responsible for dropping the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which effectively ended the Second World War.
The term flying saucers really started back in June the 24th, 1947. A civilian pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold was flying over the Cascade Mountains when he observed a formation of strange objects. He later reported this to newsmen, and one of them asked him how these objects flew through the sky. Kenneth Arnold said, as if saucers skipped on a pond, and lo and behold, flying saucers were then born. The so-called UFO crash at Roswell took place just several weeks later, when the newspapers were already full of flying saucer stories from around the world. It first came to public attention on the front cover of the Roswell Daily Record, and a press release from the Roswell Army Airfield announced that the rumours of flying discs had now been confirmed when one had been found on a ranch in the Roswell region.
My part in this story was strictly as a newsman, and as the story developed, and as I later got the official release from Walter Hout, the PIO at the U.S. Roswell Army Air Corps base, the story was gradually covered up by military authorities.
I was told to put this press release out by Colonel William H. Blanchard, who was the base commander. He called me to his office and gave me the essential facts of the story that Major Marcel had gone out to a ranch and had picked up some materials, and it was being flown to Fort Worth, and it was a flying saucer, and basically that was the whole gist of the story.
Within a day, the powers that be at the Roswell Army Airfield had said, no, sorry, we made a big mistake. It was only a weather balloon.
It wasn't a weather balloon. No. But I don't know why, they don't tell what it was, But it's a secret they've kept well.
My assignment here at Roswell, where I got involved with the UFO crash, the military, my immediate command went ahead and gave me a lawful order not to talk about UFOs without their permission, not to write articles, not to fill Freedom of Information Act requests or correspond with senators or other ufologists.
It wasn't until almost 20 years later that nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, quite by chance, whilst doing a television show in the United States, was told, why don't you speak to retired Major Jesse Marcel? He's told us that he had something to do with a crash flying saucer story at Roswell. So Stanton Friedman found Major Marcel, who was there at the time. He went on to say that he was the base intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield back in 1947.
He told me not to say anything. He says, I'll handle it from now on. And that's exactly what he did. When he came out, he told the press that was there, he said, that was nothing but a weather balloon, crashed weather balloon. So what it could have been, I wouldn't know. I still don't know. It was definitely not a weather balloon.
So the debris was found on the ranch by Mac Brazel.
Roswell got on the phone and talked to me about what was out there, and he was quite upset as to what to do about it. So I said, why don't you contact the Roswell Army Air Corps base? They're flyers. They'll know what to do about anything that flies.
Mac took it to the local sheriff in the town. The sheriff contacted the Roswell Army Air Force. It was those that sent Major Jesse Marcel to Mac Bressel's ranch to have a look for himself.
They were up there, they kept him down there nearly a week. Yeah, are they really scoured the whole country and making sure they got it all?
At that time, I thought it had something to do with national security. There were all sorts of government projects underway, and New Mexico was a major center of scientific advancement as far as the military was concerned. So for that reason, I didn't talk about it for years.
Marcel was very definitive in his comments that the material was not of this earth, plus the fact that he did not feel that at that time we had the technology to create any material similar to it.
He handled this material, and there was so much of it, he couldn't collect it all. He managed to put some of it in the back of his Jeep or his truck. He was so excited by it that on the way back to the base, he called it his home and awoke his wife and his son to show them this material, and he spread it out on the table in the house and said this is a historic event.
The objects were sent to various other national agencies so that other technical intelligence data could be gathered.
Unfortunately, Major Marcel is now no longer with us. He died in the late 1980s, but he went on the record many, many times and said that the wreckage he handled, the debris, was not of this earth.
None of the materials that we picked up weighed anything. Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands. I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a foil in a pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, he said, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal, but he says, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. He says, I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it.
They had these strange purple inscriptions upon them. And again, they could not identify these figures, these hieroglyphs as have been called.
The material we saw had no bearing with any of the weather balloons being used in those days. As I said, there was an I-beam, small, very light, but I could see the markings on the flange, which were almost like hieroglyphics as far as we were concerned. We couldn't read them. And I saw the material, and none of that is a part of a weather balloon.
And as to why the government would cover up something like this, that's just too big a question for me to give you a simple answer.
After that time, of course, books were published. The first book on the Roswell case was called The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore, and the whole case was resurrected yet again. And the more exposure that the case had, books, television, radio, newspapers, magazines, more and more of the military personnel who were there at the time came forward, as did civilian witnesses.
So an hour later, we also had the ambulance service here in Roswell at that time. And I got an emergency call, and it was from an airman that had been injured. And I took the airman to the Air Base Hospital or the infirmary at the Air Base. And when I got to the Air Base where I usually park, there was three field ambulances there. And there was two MPs standing by the door. One of the doors was open, and I could see a lot of wreckage in there. And it didn't look like aluminum, like an airplane material. It looked like a stainless steel that had become in contact with intense heat. It was a bluish, purplish, but also it wasn't melted and it wasn't bent like it. It looked like maybe a plate glass that had been dropped and shattered is what a lot of it looked like. And then there was a piece that were laying up against the wall in the ambulance, and it kind of was shaped into the bottom of a canoe. And on the outer edge of that, there was something about 3 inches or 4-inch letters that looked like some Egyptian hieroglyphics. That's what it reminded me of. And in the other ambulance, there was the other one that was on the side of it also had one of the doors open, and I could see the same thing, and there was another one of these pieces that looked like that. Then I walked on in, and I looked at it. Then I walked on in and checked the airman in to the infirmary and signed all the vouchers and everything. On the way down, I saw this captain standing by the door, and this is where I really got in trouble. I saw the captain there, and I said, "Sir, it looks like we had a plane crash. Do I need to go in and get ready for it?" And then he became very alarmed, and he wanted to know who I was and where I was from and what was I doing there. When we started down the hallway, they were taking me out. There was a voice from the back that said, "Bring that son of a bitch back." And so when we turned around, here was the big red-headed captain, and he had a black sergeant there with a clipboard in his hand. And he said, "Listen, mister," he said, "you don't go back," and he was hitting me like this on the shoulder very lightly. He said, "You don't go back in Roswell and tell everybody there's been a crash, because nothing has happened out here."
So I'd spoken to Ray Santilli previous to this on the telephone, and we'd exchanged a few faxes, and he basically outlined the story of how he acquired the Roswell film footage. So he came along to the lecture at the London Business School, and we first met there face to face. And again, he told me that how he'd quite literally stumbled into this film footage whilst researching a music video in the United States.
Well, nearly 3 years ago, I was in America working on a music program. The company that I work for is a music company, or a music-related company. We made it known that we were looking for footage from the mid-50s, and as a result of that research, I eventually met the cameraman.
And my curiosity was pricked. But I said, with the greatest of respect, I don't know who you are, and until I see the film, it remains just a story. Part of my association and my group and myself hear such stories, on a regular basis. And no disrespect to him at the time, it was just another story.
When someone first tells you that they have footage of an alien autopsy or a crash disc, obviously it sounds an incredible story, and it does stretch credibility somewhat. But I thought, well, there was nothing to lose by going down and viewing the footage. So I agreed to take an internal flight and to his hometown. I had the opportunity to see the film in his house. And the interesting thing about that was that when you see someone's house, you get an idea of the kind of person they are. I saw the memorabilia, I saw the photographs on the wall, I saw his diaries, and it was obvious that he is the person that he said he was.
I joined the forces in March of 1942 and left in 1952. The 10 years I spent serving my country were some of the best years of my life. My father was in the movie business, which meant I had a good knowledge about the workings of cameras and photography. For this reason, I believe I passed a medical that would not normally allow me in due to polio as a child. After my enrollment and training, I was able to use my camera skills and became one of the few dedicated cameramen in the forces. I was sent to many places, and as it was wartime, I fast learnt the ability of filming under difficult circumstances. I'll not give more detail on my background, only to say that in the fall of 1944, I was assigned to intelligence, reporting to the Assistant Chief of Air Staff. I was moved around depending on the assignment. During my time, I filmed a great deal, including the tests at White Sands. I remember very clearly receiving the call to go to White Sands. I'd not long returned from St. Louis, Missouri, where I'd filmed the new ramjet. It was June 1st when MacDonald asked me to report to General McMullen for a special assignment. I'd had no experience working with McMullen, but after talking to him for a few minutes, I know that I would never wish to be his enemy. McMullen was straight to the point, no messing. I was ordered to a crash site just southwest of Socorro. It was urgent, and my brief was to film everything in sight, not to leave the debris until it had been removed, and I was to have access to all areas of the site. If the commander in charge had a problem with that, I was told to get them to call McMullen. A few minutes after my orders from McMullen, I received the same instructions from Tui, saying it was the crash of a Russian spy plane. 2 generals in one day. This job was important. I flew out from Andrews with 16 other officers and personnel, mostly medical. We arrived at Wright-Patterson and collected more men and equipment. From there, we flew to Roswell on a C-54. When we got to Roswell, we were transported by road to the site. When we arrived, the site had already been cordoned off. From the start, it was plain to see this was no Russian spy plane. It was a large disc flying saucer on its back with heat still radiating from the ground around it. The commander on site handed over to the SAC medical team, who were still waiting for Kenny to arrive. However, nothing had been done, as everyone was just waiting for orders. It was decided to wait until the heat subsided before moving in, as fire was a significant risk. This was made all the worse by the screams of the freak creatures that were lying by the vehicle. What in God's name they were, no one could tell. But one thing's for sure. They were circus freaks, creatures with no business here. Each had hold of a box which they kept hold of in both arms, close to their chests. They just lay there crying, holding these boxes. Once my tent had been set up, I started filming immediately. First the vehicle, then the site and debris. At around 0600, it was deemed safe to move in. Again, the freaks were still crying, and when approached, screamed even louder. They were protective of their boxes, but we managed to get one loose with a firm strike at the head of a freak with the butt of a rifle. The 3 freaks were dragged away and secured with rope and tape. The other one was already dead. The medical team were reluctant at first to go near these freaks, but as some were injured, they had no choice. Once the creatures were collected, the priority was to collect all debris that could be removed easily, as there was still a risk of fire. This debris seemed to come from exterior struts that were supporting a very small disc on the underside of the craft, which must have snapped off when the disc flipped over. The debris was taken to tent stations for logging, then loaded onto trucks. After 3 days, a full team from Washington came down, and the decision was taken to move the craft. Inside it, the atmosphere was very heavy. It was impossible to stay longer than a few seconds without feeling sick. Therefore, it was decided to analyze it back at base. So it was loaded onto a flat top and taken to Wright-Patterson, which is where I joined it. I stayed at Wright-Patterson for a further 3 weeks, working on the debris. I was then told to report to Fort Worth for the filming of an autopsy. Normally, I'd not have a problem with this, but it was discovered that the freaks may be a medical threat. Therefore, I was required to wear the same protective suits as the doctors. It was impossible to handle the camera properly. Loading and focusing was very difficult. In fact, against orders, I removed my suit during the filming. The first 2 autopsies took place in July 1947. After filming, I had several hundred reels. I separated problem reels, which required special attention in processing. These I would do later. The first batch was sent through to Washington, and I processed the remainder a few days later. Once the remaining reels had been processed, I contacted Washington to arrange collection of the final batch. Incredibly, they never came to collect or arrange transportation for them. I called many times, then just gave up. The footage has remained with me ever since. In May of 1949, I was asked to film the 3rd autopsy.
I told Ray Santilli right from day one that I would need evidence to prove the film to either be fake or genuine, not listen to him, his opinions, or anyone else's opinions for that matter, because they really don't matter to anyone. My opinion isn't worth anything. And we've said all along we would take a neutral stance on the authenticity of the film until either he or someone else could show us some evidence to either suggest or prove it to be the genuine article, or at some point in time, either before or after its television broadcasts and so on, somebody somewhere will come forward with some kind of evidence to say it's not the genuine article, it is a fake or something of a similar nature. And as yet, I haven't seen either of those types of evidence.
Kodak was asked to verify the age of the film stock. Their response is outlined in the following letter. Regarding the Roswell footage, I've looked at the safety release print. From the geometric year markings on the print, square/triangle, the original stock was definitely manufactured in Rochester, New York in either 1927, 1947, or 1967. This is a copy of the original film packaging as supplied by the cameraman with additional details of processing instructions. Bob Shell, an independent film expert, was asked to analyze a section of the original print of autopsy footage. His response is outlined in the following letter. The film on which this was shot is Cine Kodak Super XX film type, which was discontinued in 1957. Since the edge code could be 1927, 1947, or 1967, and this film was not manufactured in 1927 or 67, this clearly leaves us with only 1947 as an option. Based on this, I see no reason to doubt the cameraman's claim that this film was exposed in June or July of 1947 and processed a few days later. This is a report from Dr. C.M. Milroy, a Home Office pathologist and senior lecturer in forensic pathology at Sheffield University. What appeared to be the membranes covering the brain, dura, were shown to be cut and the brain being removed. Although a close-up shot of the brains was shown, it was again out of focus. However, the appearances were not those of a human brain. Overall, the appearances were whilst the examination had features of a medically conducted examination, aspects suggested it was not conducted by an experienced autopsy pathologist, but rather by a surgeon. This classified top-secret report was allegedly recovered from the U.S. National Archive. It clearly outlines the events that took place at Roswell in July 1947. This briefing document was prepared by President Truman for President-elect Dwight Eisenhower. In spite of these efforts, little of substance was learned about the object until a local rancher reported that one had crashed in a remote region of New Mexico, located approximately 75 miles northwest of Roswell Army Air Base, now Walker Field. On the 7th of July 1947, a secret operation was begun to assure recovery of the wreckage of this object for scientific study. During the course of this operation, aerial reconnaissance discovered that 4 small human-like beings had apparently ejected from the craft at some point before it had exploded.
So far, there isn't a shred of evidence to suggest that this film that you're about to see is a hoax. I think it's the most significant piece of film on the subject matter. I hope you enjoy it.
This extraordinary film remains the subject of debate. The investigation continues.